Good morning, I'm Riccardo Nanni from the University of Bologna, and I'm presenting the work in progress of my PhD thesis in international relations on the influence of China in global internet governance, that is, the influence of both China's government and China's non-state stakeholders, its tech companies, for instance. Quickly, a few words on the three main organizations featuring in this research. 3GPP, the third generation partnership project, is the main body elaborating universal specifications on mobile internet standards. ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, is the body managing critical internet resources, mainly referring to the internet protocols, IP, which are the unique numerical identifiers for each internet connected device, and the DNS, the domain name system, which is, roughly speaking, the list of all names connected to one single IP website, to put it roughly. Next, the IETF is the body that elaborates the basic working tools, the protocols that make the internet work in the way we know, and IPs are among them. Now, why this topic? Because it connects directly to the debate on the decline of the liberal international order and the rise of China. Debates that have been ongoing for at least the last 2 decades in international relations theory. Something very similar goes on in global internet governance, where China is deemed to challenge the multi-stakeholder internet governance, which is the existing system, which is a liberal informed one because, as we all know, the internet was founded in the US by a US-based technical community. Now, of course, initially the debate was very Manichaean in a sense. China as a supporter of a multilateral, state-centric governance system as opposed to the multi-stakeholder one. Then through time it became more and more nuanced, but we'll see about that. My research addresses two major academic debates. One is on the role of state and the multi-stakeholder internet governance system. Is the role of states, of governments, growing in the multi-stakeholder system, and has China something to do with it? The next debate is on alignment and fragmentation. Is China building its own national internet, so is China fragmenting the internet? Or is China rather controlling online information flows domestically, therefore aligning the internet, while reshaping the global internet rules, participating in it, and also enjoying the network benefits? So, I have a very broad research question, which is China reshaping the rules of global internet governance? And more specifically, I ask myself, is China increasing state centricity in global internet governance? And is China fragmenting the internet? Of course, global internet governance is quite a catch-all phrase. So I will focus on China's influence in two subsets of internet governance. First, mobile internet standards, so 3G, 4G, and 5G. And my organization of reference in this case will be 3GPP. And second, critical internet resources governance, so the governance of IPs and the DNS. And in this case, I will focus on China's activity in ICANN and the IETF. Why these two topics? Because while seemingly technical, they have important implications for international relations theory. Security-wise, 5G enables military IoT devices. There are human rights implications. Censorship is DNS and IP based. For instance, when WikiLeaks was blocked, the website was still accessible by typing in the URL bar the website's IP. So it's a technical issue that stands behind a very political one like censorship. And of course there are human rights implications for 5G as well, because other than military IoT, it enables medical IoT. Finally, there are economic and financial aspects at stake. The standardization of 5G, and in particular of the radio accessibility network, affects mobile device market. And of course, as in any other standardization process, there are intellectual property right matters at stake. So to be clear, my focus will not be on the application of these standards, but rather on the politics of standardization and resources management, on the previous step, in a sense. How am I studying what I want to study? Well, starting from secondary sources that have systematized actors' contribution to 3GPP and the IETF, I elaborated 4 working suppositions, which I will show in the next slides, and on the basis of them, I'm elaborating qualitative semi-structured interviews with Chinese and non-Chinese representatives of 5 internet stakeholder communities: governments, international organizations, tech multinationals, civil society, and the technical community. Findings will be interpreted in light of the most recent development in 2 streams of literature: regime theory, which accounts for the dynamicity and bidirectionality of the relation between actors and the internet regime complex, and the English School of International Relations, which as a stream of literature accounts for the interactive construction of norms and the hierarchical relation among them. Now, I call them streams of reference literature because I will not be applying the principles directly, but I'm rather drawing from them to elaborate and constantly re-elaborate my theoretical background. Now, here are the 4 working suppositions I mentioned. First of all, I will be working on a time reference that spans from 1998 to nowadays, 1998 being the year of birth of both ICANN and 3GPP. Now, 2 working suppositions are on mobile internet standards. First, Chinese elaborated standards on the mobile internet are competing, therefore not coexisting, with EU and US ones. This means that both Chinese and Western actors are seeking to establish universal standards, not local ones. Universal standards that are to be adopted by their respective competitors. Next, I suppose governments and government-controlled actors influencing global technical standardization processes has increased, and China has contributed to it. Next 2 suppositions are on critical internet resources governance. First, China's accession to ICANN's Governmental Advisory Committee, the so-called GAC, has increased governmental influence on ICANN's work. Next, China's increased participation in the IETF has enhanced the likelihood of separate internet standards being created. Now, this latter supposition appears to be in contrast with the first one on mobile internet standards. It's not necessarily the case. Critical internet resources are technological tools that allow the internet to work in the way we know. Mobile internet standards, instead, are technological tools that make use, in a sense, of critical internet resources to move data from one device to another. So the 2 suppositions, while seemingly contrasting, might be true at the same time. Well, of course, these are working suppositions that I've elaborated on the basis of empirical evidence emerging from 3GPP and the IETF, but interpretations will be proved or disproved through qualitative semi-structured interviews with key informants, with experts. Now, what have I done so far? I've interviewed 22 such experts from the 5 stakeholder communities. My next targets will be to involve more Chinese stakeholders, because so far I've been mostly focused on Europe, and to differentiate expertise on mobile internet standards, as so far I've mostly interviewed telecommunication engineers. Now, what have I found so far? China appears to be aiming at shaping universal mobile internet standards and not at creating alternative ones. This emerges from interviews. There's no evidence of China trying to establish local 5G standards, but also from historical record. China adopted its own domestic 3G standard, but when it came to 4G, China adopted both the universal specification and the local one, allowing this or that operator to use one or the other. Nowadays, Chinese actors are among the key standard setters for 5G. This means both that Chinese actors have become more powerful, but also that the more protectionist in commerce strategy of creating domestic specification failed in internationalizing Chinese technology, while participating to the global standardizations and winning the competition or trying to win the competition is actually a much more profitable strategy as it appears. China is also a country that no longer simply needs to protect its national market while importing technology, but quite to the contrary, it produces domestic technology and it promotes its standard globally to benefit from intellectual property rights. As mentioned, China is quantitatively more participatory in critical internet resources governance. It's especially true in the IETF, much more than in GAC or in ICANN in general. It acknowledges ICANN, it participates in ICANN, and well, both the Chinese government and Chinese non-governmental actors. But as a country overall, it's also pursuing this strategy of strengthening its national position in the ITU. So there's quite an ambivalence in that, and I need to sharpen my understanding of this phenomenon in the next steps of this research. Next, China is not creating any domestic internet. China is not splitting the internet, at least at the technical level. There's no evidence of Chinese actors creating any protocol or specification that will detach technically the Chinese internet from the global one. However, it is true that users in China use other platforms compared to EU and US users. They access different contents. So can we talk about a fragmentation at the platform level, at the user level? I'm not sure about that. This is also something I will need to sharpen as I go with the research. Getting closer to international relations theory, it appears true so far that the liberal order can allow emerging powers to become global powers within the existing orders, rule makers within the existing orders. After all, Chinese actors became key standard setters in mobile internet standards within 3GPP, not in newly created, newly established institutions or organizations, but in 3GPP, which was established at the end of the 90s by the European Telecommunications Standard Institute together with its Japanese equivalent. Before concluding, some limits and caveats of my research on which I'd like to hear your suggestions. As mentioned, I elaborated for working suppositions based on empirical evidence. Now, that empirical evidence is purely quantitative. I can't interpret the content of those documents. First of all, because there are too many, but also because they're not intelligible most of the time to people who do not directly participate to the processes. Is there a limit to my research? I'm not sure about that. Well, of course, I inquire on the content of documents during interviews, but I can't inquire on the content of specific document. I rather inquire on the general trend. Next, the classification of stakeholder communities I'm following, the fivefold one, yields conceptual overlappings. For instance, telecommunication engineers are both members of the technical community and representative of multinational enterprises. After all, it's for them they work most of the time. So shall I use another taxonomy, another categorization drawn from literature or policy fora? Well, all of them carry limitations and have been criticized either for not being representative enough or for having conceptual overlappings. Next, Chinese stakeholders are in the eye of the storm. They're not as open as European ones when it comes to interviews. Well, of course they are open. I can talk to them. I did talk to some of them, but it's not as easy as it is with the European ones in a sense. They have strong confidentiality policies, for instance. This is something I should bear in mind while going on with my research and address it. Next is digital Orientalism, the idea according to which we tend to see happening in the internet landscape of China what we don't want to see happening at home in commerce. And by we, I mean Western observers. Now, I'm not sure to what extent this holds true, but Surely, as a white European researcher, I should problematize my perspective when addressing the policies and choices of actors that come from such a different cultural, political, and social background as China's. Next, the public private relations in China. How do I conceptualize it? I mean, it's an authoritarian state, so we can safely assume that the government has some form of political control on private actors. But what about the opposite? To what extent can private actors, powerful ones like Huawei, shape the interests and policies of the government? I don't know about that, but this is something I should bear in mind while going on with the research. Now, this is all from my part. Thank you for your attention.